The Pope in the encyclical Laudato Si said we have to dare to take the pain of the world and turn it into our own personal pain. And similarly, I think we need to take the pain of the world and take it on as personal responsibility.
Let's just start off with the main question: is what is the climate mobilization? How did it kind of begin, and what is its main goals?
The Climate Mobilization is an organization based around the Pledge to Mobilize, which is several things in one. It is a public acknowledgement that climate change threatens to cause the collapse of civilization within this century. It is a political platform that demand a World War II scale climate mobilization that eliminates net greenhouse gases by 2025. And it is a set of personal and political commitments. So when you sign the Pledge to Mobilize, you say, I will support political candidates with my vote, time, or money who have also signed this pledge. And most importantly, I'm going to spread the truth of climate change and this pledge to others. It's a connector between national and international action and hyper-local action. Talk to your friends, your family, your book group, your coworkers about the climate crisis and get them to sign on to this national and international program. Our international pledge, the demands are for an emergency climate mobilization that reduces that creates net carbon neutrality globally by 2030. So 15 years to global net zero.
What is the importance of looking at this pledge as both a personal but also an external social political pledge?
So I'm a psychologist. I earned my Ph.D. in clinical psychology a year ago. During my training, I started to get more and more alarmed about climate change and more involved in research and thinking about solutions. And my basic question was, how is it? What is happening in people's minds and in our kind of collective social life that this crisis is happening, this absolutely tremendous, horrific crisis is happening, but people are basically living their lives as normal. I mean, doing things like planning for retirement, living life, imagining a future that is totally unrelated to the actual future we're heading towards. So what is this? How is it that denial and other defenses, such as dissociation, are keeping people so out of touch with the immensity of the crisis and how personal it is? I mean, the idea that climate change is going to affect me. If people feel helpless against this absolutely catastrophic threat, it kind of makes sense that they would say just like, nope, I'm not going to go there, I'm going to screen it out because it makes me feel terrible and there's nothing I can do anyway. So the Pledge to Mobilize is really like a direct confrontation to that. It provides everyone a direct way to say, this is what I demand, this is what is necessary, and the main mode of action is spreading that to others. You know, nobody talks about climate change. You can't go to a dinner party and talk about climate change. You can't bring it up casually because it's too big. So there's silence around climate change.
Where in American history has society experienced such a large-scale solution to counteract the problem?
Yeah, so World War II is our historical period that we reference a lot. After World War I, we had just disarmed, shut down weapons production, slashed the defense budget, and Americans just did not want to get involved in another European war, understandably. But that desire not to get involved in another European war was really blinding everyone to how dangerous the situation was becoming there and to us. and how behind we were in armaments, because after World War I, Germany put all of its efforts into rearmament, and they had pioneered a new technique of warfare called blitzkrieg that they were just sweeping through Europe, and no one could stop them because they had a mechanized army, and no one else did. I mean, they had tanks. So I mean, we were just seriously not with the program of mechanized warfare. And then Pearl Harbor in the United States caused this awakening that we said, oh my God, we need to go to war. I mean, Congress declared war almost unanimously. And isolationism, this incredibly powerful political force in the United States, just was gone after that, because everyone understood we are in danger, and that's the most important thing. Simply, it was everyone's responsibility to contribute to the war effort, and people did that in different ways. People joined the armed forces. 10% of Americans relocated to have a war job. The automobile factories were completely transitioned to airplanes and tanks so that no cars were produced, no consumer automobiles in 1943. I mean, these transitions, every business, every family, every individual, every religious institution, every university said, our primary duty now is to help the war effort, because without that, we have nothing. We don't continue. So that mentality is precisely what we need for climate change. We need a rapid as possible transition off fossil fuels and off carbon-intensive agriculture that absolutely requires every citizen, every university, every business. When you use the lens of World War II, it becomes really easy to imagine how we could solve climate change. You just have to get into this mindset of like total mobilization.
How would maybe, let's say, the civil rights movement, or the women's suffrage movement, or like these kinds of ideas of racist or sexist or bigoted comments being prevalent and allowed to permeate culture, and we see these things decreasing, how can we kind of draw parallels from those kinds of events?
One of the most kind of basic answers is that it is very important to remember that people can change, societies change. This is actually what you see if you look at history, even recent history, but neoliberal capitalism really breeds this mentality that this is the only possible economic system, this is the only possible social system, the end of history. That is just completely wrong, and that in fact we decide what our society looks like. That's something that we get to have a say in because we live in a democracy, but also because we're actors, we're agents in the world. Margaret Mead said, I'm paraphrasing, but never doubt that a small group of concerned citizens can change the world. Indeed, they are the only thing that does. There's no reason to be discouraged or to set a kind of weak or small goals. Go big. I mean, we need it, and it happens through history again and again. But another, I think, critical lesson from social movement history is about the value of truth and how truth is communicated. Gandhi Satyagraha campaign in India translates as truth force. It is about exposing through action the truth. In that case, that colonialism was repressive and brutal. It showed that just very, very clearly. The truth, which was too often covered up or looked away from, or kind of prettied up or naturalized, was laid bare. Right? This is a brutal system. And in the civil rights movement, it was the same thing. That by sending the message of that African American protesters were full of dignity and restraint, we said as a country, okay, this is not something that we can passively accept. We need to proactively create legislation that guarantees equal rights and voting rights. My main essay for the climate mobilization is called The Transformative Power of Climate Truth, that talks about these social movements and how they are driven by truth, and talks about how, sadly, in the climate movement, there can be a real fear of truth. This idea that, well, you can't really tell people how bad the problem is because then they will freak out and shut down, which is I think really quite regrettable. And to me, to get at the truth of climate change, you have to talk about the fact that it threatens to cause the collapse of civilization, not just all the symptoms, sea level rise, droughts, storms, tropical diseases, all this stuff. It's not enough to just talk about the symptoms. We need to talk about that these all add up to failed states. I mean, just the breakdown of what we have built collectively. If you leave them out to spare people from the potential pain of their reaction, then you're not telling the whole truth. And I just do not see how we could expect people to become passionate, dedicated climate activists, which is what we need more than anything, if we're not willing to say, we're in danger. I'm driven by fear primarily. I don't think fear is something the movement should avoid. We should contain that fear with advocating huge solutions.
And I think, as you talk about this, someone might start to wonder, well, how is this based in human psychology? And I think that you might be the perfect person for me to ask this, because, people, rightfully do think that, people will shut down if they get too discouraged or too overwhelmed, but I'm sure that you've kind of seen a light at the end of this tunnel that maybe others might not be aware of.
You actually put it quite well, that I absolutely think that the truth of climate change can cause people to feel overwhelmed and to shut down. That is definitely true. I think, however, that is an unavoidable process that people must go through if they are possibly going to emerge on the other side. When someone makes that kind of transformation from basically passive on climate to fiercely active, that is the fuel for a social movement. With the idea of a climate story that they can kind of stomach and it's not too hard, that is how you get people who are maybe willing to support some lukewarm climate legislation.
Let's say someone is feeling like, wow, Margaret's saying something really interesting right now, but I just have this deep, heavy feeling inside of me where I just don't feel like there really is something. Maybe is there a kind of step that someone can be working towards that leads them into that feeling of purpose and of community?
If you don't have agency, then life just happens to you, and it could be good, it could be bad, but kind of you take what comes. But if you have agency, then that's the idea that you can shape things, right? That you can take an active role in solving your problems or enhancing the good things in life. So if people hear about climate change and feel dulled or depressed, I would say probably the place to focus is agency. Does this person feel like they can control any area of their life? Is the idea of positive change something that they believe in at all?
A lot of the people that I have spoken to, activists, people who are really engaged with their community, the thing that I hear over and over from them is that feeling of real purpose and pride in what they're doing. Could you just talk a little bit about how that works with the human psyche and how valuable that is over other things such as physical comforts and money?
Today in neoliberal capitalism, our culture says, you are living for you, for your pleasure, your fulfillment, your greatness, you. And the thing is, it's actually not very enjoyable to live that way. It's not fulfilling, it's not purposeful, it feels pretty empty. And to live with a sense of purpose, whether it's a national purpose, which is what we need for climate change, or a personal purpose, is better. We were not built to be individual, pleasure maximizing machines. We're better than that.
I want to take a step towards your own personal motivations to that, so it might serve as kind of an example for people. You were doing your Ph.D. in clinical psychology, and you were saying you imagined yourself just doing that traditional role. What changed for you, and does it feel like an actual sacrifice for you, or does it feel more like a realization of something greater?
Climate change was just progressively challenging my own personal defenses against it. One of which I think is big in a lot of people. It was willful ignorance, meaning I would read a couple lines of an article about climate change and just say, oh my God, no, just exit out. Don't, I mean, yeah, the feeling of overwhelming dread followed by just shutting it off. I did that for quite a while. But yeah, the climate kept changing, and I guess I wore my defenses down. I started to think after Sandy, I thought, okay, I'll write about the psychology of climate change. And I published an article on the internet, and I was getting ready to start a blog. And a good friend of mine said to me, don't start a blog. Discourse isn't enough. Think, what could you do that could actually solve this problem? And that challenge, it literally blew my mind. I mean, I thought, what? I had never, because this is the thing about helplessness. The idea of solving climate change, like, how do you even start? But it grabbed me in a way that nothing in my life has ever grabbed me. And I started investigating, just reading as much as I could about the history of social movements, the psychology of denial, climate change itself as a phenomenon, the existing climate movement, etc. And the result, what came out of all of that, was this strategy of the pledge to mobilize. That was really the shift that really changed my life, is the idea of like, what could you do to solve climate change? Like that. Before then, it's just like, yeah, that maybe that's an impossible challenge. I don't care, because you gotta try. I actually did start a blog, but with this very specific purpose of, we're gonna build something. And through my blog, I met people from all over the world who gave advice or got on board with the project. This is a theoretical way in which we could solve climate change. If enough people take this pledge and demand that the government mobilize our economy and society, and then we do, following the example of World War II, we have a shot.
When you look at just, evolution, human psychology, you kind of get that moment where it turns from a small faction to the overwhelming majority, and then all of a sudden it's cool to do it, and it almost feels like something that we all have to do, and there's countless examples for that. But where do you see that moment kind of occurring with this subject?
It's a big question. There's this TED Talk. It's like a 3-minute TED Talk, and one person is just dancing to music, and he's like totally going nuts. It's like, who's this guy just dancing like crazy when everybody's just sitting on the towel? What changes is that somebody else goes and joins him. So there's this concept of the first follower, meaning one guy, that's a lone nut. But then you've got 2 people dancing, and the concept of leadership changes. Now, the other people don't have to follow that nut. They can follow the first follower. Pretty soon, everybody's charging to get in on the dance, because they don't want to be the loser who's not dancing, right? That there absolutely is a shift. So similarly, about climate change, we absolutely need to get to a point where to be against climate mobilization is to be in favor of the collapse of civilization. The civil rights movement, for example, accomplished the change in cultural norms that being racist is no longer compatible with being upstanding, right? It is not an acceptable thing to be. And we really do need to get to that point, not just with climate action, but with drastic climate action, with climate action that is our first priority, and to create a social situation in which being against that is untenable, is a fringe position that people are literally running to get away from.
And also to show people that it's fun, just like that dance party. I mean, you see the People's Climate March. That was a moment where 400,000 people came together, not only in solidarity, but also to kind of celebrate what kind of brings us all together. And, the smiling, the music, the culture that comes out of that. It's all very positive.
I think it's an important point, that you can still have fun, like you've earned it.
What's been one of the most positive moments of community or people coming together for this cause that's really made you feel the most hopeful for this 10 or 15 year plan?
The climate mobilization primarily exists on the internet. That's its main home rather than New York City. But the most moving positive experiences for me were times when we did get together in person in New York City, which was at the People's Climate March, which was such an exciting experience because we had about 8 or something people with us during the march, and we had t-shirts, and we just went up to marchers, right? We just handed out flyers and we said, "Can I talk to you about the climate mobilization? Can I talk to you about the climate mobilization?" And it was great because it was such a positive spirit, and the vast majority of people said, "This sounds awesome, cool, where do I sign up?" There absolutely is a very powerful positive feeling about working with a team and working together and feeling like we're at the start of something. Yeah, it creates a team mentality that is very enjoyable.